Big Brother actually is watching you and your every move. In other words, your privacy rights are being trampled on and they are being violated by governments and big tech companies. Both are egregious abuses of power. Now, you may wish to shrug it off and say to yourself, well, I have nothing to worry about. I live a clean life. That is until then one day, which former NSA veteran William Binney says, you become irritated by an act of overreach by your government. So you decide to exercise your right to freedom of speech and thought and your right to peacefully protest. And you stand in front of City Hall and call out what you believe to be an injustice. Binney says, when you do that, you will then be on a watch list, and they will find you, and quickly. That's because you and your data left electronic fingerprints everywhere. And contrary to what you believe about democratic governments spying on its citizens, they are. And he goes on to say, they will use the information they gathered about you against you. William Binney is a retired 36-year veteran of the National Security Agency in the United States. He was awarded the Allard Prize for International Integrity after he blew the whistle on the NSA for using a program he developed called Thin Thread to spy on Americans. I invited William Binney to join me for a conversation that matters about your loss of privacy, both in Canada and the United States. Mr. Binney, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me.
You left the NSA shortly after the raids on 9/11 because you believed that there was an abuse of power. Back then, you said that the rights of Americans were being, trampled on, misappropriated, that they were not being respected. How bad was it then, and how bad has it become?
Back then, the initial step they took was to take in all of the billing records of phone calls on U.S. citizens. That was we Americans were the first ones in the bulk acquisition of data program because we were the closest. And also at that time, I think about 80% of the international traffic crossing the fiber optic lines passed through the United States. So if they did it here, they would get 80% of what happened in the world. And so that was their objective. Now, some people may think that might be difficult, but with today's capacity for processing and storing, this is almost a trivial issue. It's easy to do. As the tech companies are showing you, they're doing it. So, I mean, it's not that difficult to do. But that started with that. And then in early 2002, they spread and put more equipment out there to collect content. And Mark Klein exposed some of this in the 2002 period, where they were putting Naris devices in the AT&T facility in San Francisco, and he put this in the court record, diagrams and all of that, and the equipment nomenclature and everything. And what that says was they were taking down virtually everything on the lines, everything on the fiber lines. And that was the vast majority of the communications of U.S. citizens, as well as a good portion of everybody else in the world. And then after that, it simply expanded not just to phone calls, but to emails, and then to collecting content of emails, storing all of this information, and then storing chatter and storing short messaging, and then going into banking and travel. They already had travel. And then doing all kinds of financial things with credit cards and bank checks and things of that nature.
Had they not initially encrypted that information about American citizens and locked it away so that in essence they were protecting the rights of American citizens?
That was what I had instituted under the Thin Thread program. When they started this program violating the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution as well as any number of other laws, and I called them on it, by the way, and I've been trying to get them into court to address that, and I haven't been able to do that. The courts won't let it in. So, but you know, the whole thing was, it started with that, and that was from there. It just went downhill, and I started calling this because I was been working the Soviet problem for 27 years. And I said, you know, this is the first step towards totalitarianism. This is what the the Nazis did. This is what the communists in China did. This is what the communists in the Soviet Union did. This is standard totalitarian procedures. First, you get control and find out what the population is doing, and then you subvert them and you use all of that information and power against them. And that's the path we take. And we just kept sliding down this path. I've tried to get them into court with affidavits to different court cases for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the ACLU, and independent lawyers suing them, as well as put in affidavits in the Roger Stone case and the General Flynn case. And I've tried to send messages in to President Trump when he was there, and Attorney General Barr, and all kinds of people who are leading investigations for the supposed investigations for the FBI and the DOJ. And none of them are taking this on. None of them.
Was the tipping point 9/11? Is that when the mindset changed to say, well, we need to protect American citizens, and then that became the veil behind which this shift took place?
There's a little bit of inside the information I got on this. It came from this CEO of Quest, who was approached in February of 2001, just 7 months before 9/11. And he was approached by people from NSA asking him to turn over all of his information on all of his customers, Americans as well, to NSA. And he said he couldn't do that legally. If they'd get a warrant, why, he would do that. But that showed intent before 9/11. But what they did when 9/11 happened, they used 9/11 as a lever to instigate and institute the violations of law and the Constitution against the people of the United States and basically the people of the world. What they did was they changed the policy of how we looked at communications and analyzed things from groups of people, terrorist groups, drug smuggling groups, militaries, governments, things of that nature, to individuals. So that meant they switched from going after simply the bad guys, if you will, or potentially bad guys, to everybody. And that started in, and I first ran across that and knew about them doing that in the second week of October of 2001. And it took me 2 weeks then to get out of the place because I could not be a party to that total violation of the rights of U.S. citizens and basically everybody in the world.
So the NSA had authority, of course, to monitor communication for people who were non-American nationals. But then they switched to then sharing that information, as I understand it, internally and looking at the activities of Americans. Is that the way that progressed?
Yes, and Mueller, when he was director of FBI, just about to leave that office in March of 2011, he gave an interview to Bart Gellman, and he told him at that point that the FBI had been using the Stellar Wind program. That's the domestic spying program. See, they compartmentalize these things. Anything dealing with U.S. citizens collected in bulk acquisition is put into the Stellar Wind program. Okay, and he said they've been using that to go after crime since 2001. So wow. What that means is, and this was published by Reuters in August of 2013, I believe. That means is that FBI was looking into all the collection that NSA did on everybody, everything that everybody did electronically, and then scanning it for potential violations or criminal intent. And at that point, they would use that to go and arrest people. And so once they did that, you see, the NSA data wasn't admissible in a court of law, so they had to do what they called a parallel construction. Means they would send police out to do a standard policing techniques and gather the data that would show the criminal acts that they already knew about from the NSA data, and they would acquire it through that police action and then substitute that for the NSA data in a court of law. Now, that I called perjury. You know, that's just outright perjury, fabricating evidence for a court of law. And in the instructions to the police who were told about this to go do that, they were never allowed to say anything about the source of the data, put it in any affidavits, tell the judge or any of the lawyers in the court defending or prosecuting. They weren't allowed to do any of that, and they couldn't put it in any written form to the court at all. They were simply to present the parallel constructed data. So that meant they denied due process to all the defendants because they could not challenge the original information that was used against them to get arrested. That's their right to challenge that, and that denied them that right. That's a violation of the Sixth Amendment, and they violated the Fifth Amendment by using that data against them, and it's like using your conversations or your statements against you. And they did that without a warrant. So that's a violation of the Fifth Amendment. And then they violated the First Amendment by denying everybody free association, because you're not free to associate, because anything you do is now recorded and all your associates are gathered together and linked to you. So through phone calls, emails, money transactions, travel, what have you.
Mapping.
And so it's a violation of the First. Not counting, by the way, the Pen Register Law, the Electronic Privacy Act, Electronic Security Act, and all the laws covering the FCC regulation governing telecommunication companies. It just scrapped the entire legal system of the United States. And then we spread it around the world. And so now the Canadians are in it, the Five Eyes are in it, and about at least 9 other countries.
So how does the Five Eyes, and a number of people won't know what the Five Eyes are, but this inter-agency, inter-country network, how do they work together to circumvent domestic laws, but supply one another with information about each other's citizens?
Well, that goes back to who looks at the data. NSA collects all the data. So there's no differentiation between British citizens, Canadian citizens, US citizens, or Russians, or what have you. We're all the same, and all the data is captured and stored. Now, the Five Eyes have a special access program. That's the US, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and United States. And I mean, UK. So the 5 English-speaking countries in the world. They have a special arrangement where they use a program called IC Reach to interrogate that database. So they can go in and analyze things from, the British can analyze things in the US they can analyze people in England, and vice versa, So it's just it's a relationship that they could offload some of the work to others if they didn't want to do it for whatever reason. But it didn't make any difference. You see, the FBI could do it all. So they could still do it too. So, and their MI5 can do it. I mean, it's the same.
So what chance do we have as average people to protect our privacy, our right to free speech and free thought, leading to, as in my introduction, I had also the right to peacefully demonstrate against something that we see as an injustice. Are we helpless here?
For example, I've tried the courts to the Supreme Court of the United States, and the Supreme Court of the United States has rejected any hearing of any of this violation of constitutional and human rights inside the U.S. alone. So they rejected that. They didn't want to hear it. So I've ruled the courts out. Certainly the Department of Justice is out, because I've sent any number of things to them. I even met with the Inspector General's people, and they haven't done anything except promote and basically protect this massive bulk acquisition program. I mean, it is the crown jewel of all this intelligence agency, because it's a collection of everything that's content of everything that's collected or transmitted in the world by everybody, all the members of parliaments, every parliament in the world, all the government members, anything that's transmitted and can be captured and they've got it. And that's real power. Now, what that means is that's what in a talk I gave at the Oxford University, I said, when you give this kind of power to people, eventually they use it against you. Well, that's what the Democrats did with the IRS against conservative groups. That's what's happening now in Canada. I'm sure they're mining the people who are organizing the trucker actions, and they're going to go after them as the central conspirators of this terrorist group, or whatever they want to call it. They'll make it up.
What I find interesting about your career and your history is you initially started raising these concerns when you were still with the NSA, saying, look, we are breaching the boundaries of our authority, and yet nobody wanted to listen to you. And you
I
did
didn't
the
do
honorable
that.
thing. You resigned.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't stay there. But I didn't do that inside NSA because I knew it was a lost cause. Because I knew these people. I knew Hayden and all his cronies underneath him. I knew what they were and how they operated. So they had backing from somebody other than outside the agency to be able to do this. I knew that. So I went to the Congress, the intelligence committees, to address that because that was their job under stemming from the Church Committee investigations of NSA, CIA, and FBI back in the 1970s when Nixon used them against the U.S. people back then. And so I went directly to the staffer on the House Intelligence Committee that I knew, and I told her all about this violation of rights and the things that they were doing because I designed half of this program that they're using to do it, and I knew how all of that worked together. And I was the one putting together how you can manage handling large and vast amounts of data. So it was my responsibility to stand up against it.
There is this belief that if you shine light on wrongdoing, that the brightness of that light will bring it to a conclusion. That's not the case here. You brought this up, you've made a point, you've tried to take it to the Supreme Court of the United States, and still those in charge and who have this power go, we're not going to stop. So what do we do?
So that leads me to the only thing I could think of to do, and that's to hire people into government, starting at whatever level you can, fire anybody who is supporting these programs or continues to vote for them, watch the voting and get rid of people who do this, and then look retroactively, go back and make sure you go and indict these people who have done this over time. And you make sure that you get them all and hold them all accountable. It's the only way to stop it. Because if you don't hold these people accountable, they will do it again.
Didn't President Obama promise that that's what he was going to do when he took office? And then he went in the other direction.
Yeah, he went big time in the other direction. He doubled down on the entire program because he realized the power it gave him. That's the real issue. I mean, money, power, and control have been the driving forces of every totalitarian, every despot in the world.
So that's governments, but big tech companies also have access to much of this same information. And so we as average citizens need to be very aware of our communication and how it is going to be gathered and used. Do you have any suggestions on what the average person can do to protect themselves? Or is it a lost cause?
The average person, I don't think, can do very much at all, unless they collectively get together and force governments to start passing something like the European Union did, the CDPR regulations, where it said any of the data that a person on a person is that person's data. And so if you want to do anything, sell it, use it for advertising, do anything, you have to get the permission of that person to do that. Now that would shut down a lot of stuff, you know?
So what I find interesting is you have carried out a fairly lengthy campaign to shine light on this, to take action, to raise awareness, and yet in my dealings in telling people that this is a program that's underway and that we are all being watched, there seems to be a considerable amount of apathy about the fact that this is happening to us. And I don't quite understand why average people aren't up in arms about the fact that there is this surveillance of them in everything they do.
Yeah, I think it's because they've been fed the lie that we need to do this to protect you. If we can't do this, we won't be able to protect you. And that's an outright lie. And they knew that back in the 1990s because we had already proven how to do it and how to do it successfully with the Thin Thread program. That is using a disciplined policing discipline approach to finding criminals, using probable cause and things that reflect probable cause in communications, and that's how you separate things out. That's how we were able to manage being able to look into massive amounts of data and find bad things without having to look at that data itself. It's how you can look into data without looking at it. If you look at it, you're buried. There's just too much of it. But if you can look into it and pull out relevant stuff without having to look at it, you succeed.
So are we naive to believe that because we live in a so-called democratic country, that we have rights and, we expect these things to happen in totalitarian regimes, but it could never happen here? Are we just being naive, burying our head in the sand because life's pretty good?
Yes, we are. I mean, people are not, I mean, I've said democracy is not a spectator sport. You have to get active or you're going to lose it. And that's basically what's happening. We're losing our rights and human rights here as time progresses. They're just conditioning us to accept them over time, lesser and lesser degrees.
So what, in essence, what we've done then is hand power to people to tell us how we're supposed to live our lives and what we are and are not allowed to do, which is the antithesis of the whole concept of democratic societies, that you have freedom of choice.
Yeah, it's 1984 on steroids.
Yeah, in a way that we never could have imagined.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Where do you go from here? You're frustrated with the Supreme Court of the United States. Where do you go from here?
Well, I'm going to start back at the federal level and start trying to do injunctions and things like that at the federal level, and just try to get back into it that way. And slowly but surely, maybe I can get somebody in Congress to listen. But even when I went down there, I said, "You guys, as long as you vote." I mean, I went to several staff offices there, staffers and the senior staffers on the Senate and House side, and I said, "If you guys keep voting for this crap, you're accessories to this conspiracy to destroy the Constitution of the United States." And I didn't get any real reaction. I'm sorry to tell. I really didn't.
Well,
and it's really amazing to me. It's their oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution. Everybody does that. That's their oath of office, not to a person or a party or anything. It's the Constitution, and that's the fundamental Bill of Rights of humanity.
Well, I appreciate your ongoing efforts to shine light on this and to address it. And I encourage you to keep going, because I think that it's vitally important. Thank you very much for your time today.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.